So I will start with the latter. The problem of misinformation and fake news is not a new one, it's as old as humanity. Now, there's a difference, however. In recent years, the people who spread misinformation do not have skin in the game. They operate under the comfort and safety behind their screens, and they do not have to necessarily suffer the consequences of their speech. And artificial intelligence is the nuclear bomb that explodes 1,000 times this phenomenon, making it a lot more dangerous and intractable. Now, thankfully, there is one person who has set his brilliant mind to designing a systemic solution to this problem, and we are exceedingly honored to have this person here with us to explain his work. Marshall van Alstyne is the Allen and Kelli Questrom Professor of Information Systems at Boston University's Questrom School of Business. He's a digital fellow at the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy and a visiting scholar at Harvard's Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. He's one of the leading authorities, if not the leading authority, on the economics of digital platforms, having published numerous scientific papers and articles on the subject, including the seminal book, Platform Revolution. Every business school student has studied his work. Marshall is currently researching how to use markets to curb misinformation, and we are among the first to engage with his insight. Marshall, the floor is yours.
Fantastic, thank you. I want to start, can everyone hear me okay? I have to say, it's an incredible honor to be here in the seat of democracy. Greece, obviously, the place where things started. And I want to discuss the problem of misinformation as perhaps one of the threats to democracy, as well as one of the threats to business, to see if we can actually explore what might be some of the solutions to this. So I want to do three things today. One of these is to see if I can characterize the problem in a way that it might actually be solvable. The second is to consider why is it that current solutions are not working? And then the third might be what would work if these other solutions are not working? And the final message is one of hope, is that I actually genuinely believe that we can solve the problem of misinformation with no censorship at all, improve free speech, and have no central authority judging those outcomes. So let me get started on some of the background. Now, I want to argue also that misinformation is particularly harmful not just to democracy, but to businesses in general. One of the interesting stories here is a ROOP organization where an employee of the organization was invited into a live video conference with about 4 or 5 different individuals, each of them interacting dynamically, including an avatar of the CFO. Every single one of these was a deep fake. They convinced the employee to send out 200 million Hong Kong dollars as a consequence, live interaction with the deep fake. Others were frustrated with the woke policies of Starbucks, and so they issued a fake coupon where immigrants could actually ask for free coffee from Starbucks. Another one was someone was trying to short the stock on Emulex. They put out a fake press release that said the earnings were revised, the CEO had resigned, and the SEC was investigating. The stock declined about 60%, a little over 200 billion euros before it recovered. Another one, there was an announcement, a tweet that suggested that Trump was pausing the tariffs, to which there was a market whiplash of about $5 trillion. And then another one, on the announcement of the Apple iPhone 16, Tim Cook's actual keynote video was then used to promote a fake announcement that Apple would double your money for crypto in order that you might buy crypto coins. All of these things, of course, affecting the businesses that might have been involved. The World Economic Forum, in a report in 2024, suggested that misinformation and disinformation was one of the greatest threats on the globe today. This, of course, was before the Iran invasion. But it was also listed alongside polarization and others. So one of the largest risks overall. And then the head of the European Bank said, the task of separating truth from falsehood has plagued policymakers for centuries. We'll go back to this in a moment. The task of distilling truth is ever more urgent than before. To put a point in it, it turns out that there's a research report that suggests fake news on technology, tax, and gas has actually changed the macroeconomic uncertainty levels affecting unemployment and the stock levels. To give you the details of this, this is a report that came out of the Toulouse School of Economics. The uncertainty index within a month or so rises. This then has an implication on the industrial production, which falls. The S&P 500 index also falls, and the unemployment rate rises. So that uncertainty actually gums up the works for industry as an interesting knock-on problem for industry as a whole. This was news in the New York Times only within the past week. This was March 13th. We're now March 19. And these are AI deepfakes of activities, some of them pro-Trump actions, some of them pro-Israeli actions, some of them pro-Iranian actions. In any battle, in any war, each side tries to use disinformation to try to persuade the other side that their side is the correct side. It's an ancient problem. Matter of fact, social media have been implicated in all kinds of other damages. It's been implicated in the insurrection in the United States. It's been implicated in the insurrection in Brazil. It's been implicated in the riots in the UK, where an immigrant was accused of policies or activities that a citizen had created. Or in the Rohingya massacre, where Muslims were accused of things that they did not actually do. Matter of fact, social media have been implicated in lynching, money laundering, sex trafficking, drug trafficking, judicial intimidation, terrorist recruiting. The Israeli historian Yuval Noah Harari asked this great question: if social media are connecting us in ways that bring us all together, why is everyone so angry? That's a great question. What else can we do about it? And as I was going to say, Christine Lagarde is correct. This is not a recent problem. Politicians have been lying for a long time. How many of you have heard of Ozymandias or Ramses the Great? Any hands? Yeah, I know who's awake this morning, thank you. Well, part of the reason he was great was because he said so. Right? He won a great many battles, but the one against the Hittites he did not win, and he was almost captured, and yet the stone frescoes say that it was a great victory. Surprise, surprise. In more modern times, as in 424 BC, Aristophanes said of politicians, the people are easily led, you just need a loud voice and a pack of lies. Good thing that practice died out 400 BC and nothing happens today. So we do observe a few things of that sort. What is new is artificial intelligence deep fakes. What we now see are deep fake images of politicians in the United States, France, Greece, Poland, Slovakia. The Federal Trade Commission warned Congress the impact on politics was likely to be the worst in history. Europol warned deep fakes were being used to commit fraud, manipulate elections, manipulate shareholders. It's become a serious problem. More locally, Yanis Varoufakis says, deepfake doppelgangers of me say things I might have said, intermingled with things I would never say. He then goes on to complain sometimes they say things better than he would have said them. But for the most part, it gives someone else the ability to control the dialogue and influence the politicians. And worse than this, the platforms own the agora, the marketplace of ideas. They can elevate some voices and they can drown out others. They can privilege their own speech relative to your speech or relative to mine. Mark Zuckerberg uses as the solution, let the people decide. At a speech in Georgetown, he said people should decide, not tech companies. And at the most recent election, January of 2025, with the Trump administration, they stopped fact-checking and they turned it over to community notes. The process is one we call turning it over to the marketplace of ideas, where the hope is the best test of truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the marketplace. The Economist actually has an interesting summary of that. So he thinks that The Economist says the marketplace of ideas for today's special are brazen lies, hate speech, propaganda, hogwash, inflamed rhetoric, assorted rubbish, and gaslighting and quackery. So these become polluted with lots of different ideas in the marketplace, not of many of which are necessarily very good. This is a listing of every single one of the interventions that have been tried. It's a survey article published describing accuracy prompts, media literacy, social norms, artificial intelligence, crowdsourcing, AI fact-checking. All of these are the different things in the different places across the globe where they've been attempted. And most recently, folks have been trying to use things like on Twitter, X, or others, artificial intelligence. How many of you think AI might solve this problem? Only a few hands. Actually, I'm going to disagree with you on these. I'm actually thinking we may have some challenges. I'll give you a few reasons why I think this might be dangerous as a way to think about it. We just heard interesting evidence that the highest quality news sources put robot exclusion up at 6 times the rate of the low quality news sources. That means you're going to be training on the lower quality sources, but guess what? The propaganda sites seek to be included in order that that particular perspective is overrepresented. There was also a study that suggested they compared Grok on Twitter versus Perplexity, which is another one, and they agreed a little bit over a majority of the time, but it's fascinating, almost 1 time in 8, they completely disagreed. And then I would pose one further question, which is, do we want it to be the case that Elon Musk, who controls Grok, do we want him to be able to control what Grok tells us is the truth? When he bought Twitter, he raised his own influence from 80 million to 200 million followers. Or would we want DeepSeek to determine the truth of Tiananmen Square when it actually acts on the interests of the Chinese Communist Party? One of the things I think we need is an expression from the law, which is we need decentralization. We need contestation of diverse antagonistic sources to triangulate to the best sources of truth. How would we get decentralization to get there? I'm going to argue, if we do look at the list of all of the different solutions, all of them suffer from 1, if not 4, of several central problems. The first of these is simply the arms race problem. If you can use technology to recognize the problem, you can use technology to recognize the technology, and they fight against one another, and it just becomes an arms race. The second one is discrediting the rater. If someone's going to lie about their first claim, well, then they're going to lie about the reputation that's whoever it is that's fact-checking them. So again, it just becomes recursive. Each one is going to try to discredit the other. Another one is something I like to call putting the shoe on the wrong foot. That is, who is it that's creating the pollution? It's the source of the information. If there's a pollution problem, usually you want the factory to stop polluting as opposed to asking the citizens to all wear gas masks. That's what the let the users decide is. I'm going to put all this pollution out there, and then you get to filter out what's true and what's false, rather than having the source stop polluting in the first place. And the last one is something that not a single solution addresses, that it's actually cheaper to make stuff up than it is to do honest journalism. That's expensive, that's hard, that takes work, so the cost structure favors lies over truth. Can we correct those things? It's a really, really deep problem. Then the next question is, well, what really is the problem that we're going after? And one of the things is it's not just the truth or falsity. I'm going to argue there's another economic property, which is externality. I can tell you false things that don't matter, or true things that are half true that do. To give you some examples, some thoughts, ad exaggerations, parody, fake news that's disbelieved isn't going to affect a decision. A couple of fun examples as a headline: panda mating fails, veterinarian takes over. I don't know what the panda thinks about that, but that's an interesting problem. Or a politician in the United States made the statement, I've made good judgments in the past, I've made good judgments in the future. Well, no, he hasn't, actually. Now, would we want to suppress that? Probably not. It's not going to affect the decisions, and it might actually expose his thinking. So you might want to put some of that information out. You don't need to suppress that. Consider also truthful information. Russia used truthful information to suppress minority votes in some of the elections to influence the outcome. True news that's disbelieved could be a problem. An example of interesting truthful claim in the Chicago Tribune, when vaccines came out, healthy doctor died 2 weeks after getting a COVID vaccine, CDC investigating. That got 50 million views on Facebook. It was completely true, and the investigation discovered it was stomach cancer or something else completely unrelated to COVID or the shot. So it's truthful information, but it was effectively half-truth that actually influenced things in the wrong direction. Much of the problem is an externality. It is damage that occurs off-platform. To give you an example, maybe it's the pizza parlor shooting based on conspiracy theories. There was clickbait of claims that there were clear worms in the water. The Federal Trade Commission and Coca-Cola both had to disclaim this in order to actually stop that problem, but it was just clickbait. Salman Rushdie was stabbed by someone radicalized by YouTube videos that had never even read his works. So he was assaulted because of someone else's misinformation. Or there's the loss of herd immunity because of anti-vax misinformation. There is inaction on global warming. There is insurrection. Each of these is damage the platforms that spread that do not experience. You and I experience this. Society experiences that. Another way to think about this is advertising. Advertising produces externalities. These social media business models are advertising-based. And what's happening here is the marketer pays the platform for influence, which then affects or drives or pollutes the attention of everyone else who's participating. Silicon Valley has this expression, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And of course, you realize it is your attention that is being bought and sold on these platforms. That's an externality. They're trading in that, in your resources. Ads are not new. Social media did not invent this. This is not a modern phenomenon. Here's another Greek example. I'll go back in time. There used to be town criers in Athens for Kyriakes. They would advertise the arrival of ships bringing in for trade. Or signboards. Blacksmiths would hang a hammer and anvil above their shop so that folks could identify it. Or a particularly fun one, attractive ladies were hired to wear sandals with the words, "Follow me," in their sandals so that you would print it into the dirt and they would take you off to the merchant's room. A direct marketing campaign from 2,000 years ago. I thought it was quite clever, actually. So ads are not new. Why is it such a problem today? Well, one of these is the costs of promotion have dramatically fallen. It's not just merchants and journalists and broadcasters now. Anyone with access to the internet can publish and clamor for attention. So the costs of promotion have fallen. At the same time, the costs of correction have risen. No individual user is accountable. They're just too diffuse to go after them. And under the laws of the United States and Europe, the safe harbor provisions means it is hard to go after the platforms themselves. So on both sides, the pollution problem has dramatically increased. Jonathan Haidt, a scholar at New York University, then describes what's happening. So by rewiring everything in a headlong rush for growth with no concern for external costs imposed on society, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and a few other large platforms unwittingly dissolved the mortar of trust and belief in institutions that had held a large and diverse secular democracy together. This is exactly an externality. The damages off-platform that they are not internalizing that you and I are experiencing. So here's the challenge. Externalities cause market failures in economic terms. Market failures require intervention, but the problem is governments can't intervene in speech. In the United States, the First Amendment literally forbids it. It's not possible. So what do we do? What are the implications? The first implication is that because they're not internalizing the pollution cost, there's way too much pollution. We are overproducing pollution at this rate. So there's overproduction of misinformation. The second is that there's too little correction because attempts by courts and society and Facebook to use the marketplace of ideas to sort things out will fail. Markets do not and cannot self-correct market failures. What do we do? I like to use this as both description and possible development of a cure. Economics gives us two solutions that we know of. Maybe you'll be able to develop others, but two solutions that we know of to solve externality problems. The first of these is one that most folks will recognize, those by Pigou. So you might tax the sales or put a quota on effluent of a factory that's producing all of this damage. The problem is you can't tax speech, and what's a quota on speech? That's censorship. You can't say this means you've literally censored that amount of speech. So we can't use that set of techniques. There's another set of techniques by another economist, Ronald Coase, he uses this unusual insight that you may be able to create property rights in the missing market of harms. Let me give you an illustration of his original idea. So the original context was radio spectrum. This is back in the 1930s and 40s, where when radio towers came up, the tower in one city would increase its signal to reach its audience. That would interfere with the radio tower in an adjacent town, which would increase its signal, so they would compete with one another, and you just got radio noise and interference. His insight was, rather than having the government say, you can broadcast and you can't, create a marketplace where you create a property right in the spectrum, and the highest value use case can buy that radio spectrum and trade it. Or if a new use case comes up, they can acquire it from the current rights holder. Then we can apply this today in something like carbon rights trading, and those are negative externalities. I'll flip it for you to, so that, sharpen the intuition I know that you all have. Consider intellectual property rights. Right? If you invent something and someone else takes it, the chances of invention go down. We create property rights so that you can actually sell the value of that to someone else. That means you'll get more invention. Coase didn't invent property rights. He simply gave us an economic theory of how it is these property rights solve externality problems. It's incredibly powerful. Can we do that here in the missing market of harms? So here's the question. The challenge is, how do we create trade and property rights for a missing market when the social cost is essentially an intangible falsehood? How would we think about that? Well, let's ask the other question, what's the scarce resource? When it's pollution to air and water, we know it's the air and water. Well, what is it in the case of the misinformation problem? Well, as we showed a moment ago, it's the attention. Herb Simon tells us, in a context of overabundance of information, the scarce resource is attention. What gets consumed is attention. The attention of recipients is there, and a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. So can we give you control over the focus of your own attention? I'm going to propose two different rights based in historical context and see if we can expand rights in ways that will help us solve the problem. We'll give you a right to unpolluted attention, individual right to focus attention on information of preferred sources, to choose what you want to hear and see and read. But notice the right to choose implies a right not to choose and not to hear. That creates its own problem of filter bubbles. We'll come back to that in just a moment. So you might choose only to hear those things that are favorable to your own particular views. So I want to give you simultaneously a right to pierce filter bubbles, a right to be heard. In this case, an individual right to influence the decisions that affect you, counter disagreeable speech with agreeable speech, but this means grabbing attention from someone who might not want to give it. Interestingly, the abuse of this right implies you might misrepresent things or signal jam too much information so that other information is crowded out. How do we balance the right to hear against the right not to hear? That's an interesting challenge. We do have historical context. Again, I love Greece for giving us all of these wonderful ideas. As a matter of fact, if we go back to the agora here, the isagoria was the equal opportunity to voice one's views in political matters, the right of all citizens to address the polity and have those views judged on equal terms. There was also paresia, which was the duty to speak your mind, even on uncomfortable or unpopular events. It was fearless speech, the license to speak truth to power. Notice, if you misused those rights, there was a 50 drachma fine, which was a lot in those days. It was a drachma a day was income, so it was about 50 days. The other element I want to add, which is somewhat different, is the agora was open. Twitter and Facebook and Amazon control the agora now, so we need an increase in citizens' rights in order to be able to exercise speech in these interesting examples. So here's my proposal. I've given you the theory, and now I want to see if I can give you the implementation. Suppose we develop a new kind of advertisement. So it's exactly like a traditional ad, but it has a couple of additional properties to it. By the way, these are the existing prices on Facebook. So this is what you would pay for, beauty, for beauty ads. This is what you might pay for education ads or finance ads, or green here. The green is industrial services ads. So these are the actual prices. So let us suppose that you put an amount with the platform, and it scales with the size of the audience, which does what? It scales with the size of the externality. So it's bigger than an ad. So if the cost per click were $1.50, this might go to $5. Or if it's cost per million impressions is $7.50, then it might be $20. What you're doing is you're signaling you have higher quality information. It then has the properties that you're contesting that this is valid information. It's not illegal. It's not terrorist recruiting. It's not child sexual abuse material. It's not stolen intellectual property, the stuff that's illegal speech. You're also attesting that it's objectively verifiable. But here's the difference. If no one proves you're wrong, you get it back. So guess what? It's free, cheap. You are the author of the content. You know if you're telling the truth or not. You've created a signal that you believe this is going to be valid, and you're changing the ratio of the cost of truth to lie. So why might this work? Well, the first of these is you're solving the lie or the information asymmetry problem. Immediately, there's a clear signal of the author's private knowledge. Are they telling the truth or not? We've gone back to that pollution problem where it's the factory that has to let it make the choice as opposed to the individual on the pollution. So you get a clear signal, and the listener also gets a clear signal on, does the author know they're telling the truth or not? The second is that it solves the externality problem. Suppose someone's lying about you as an immigrant to cause policy, then immigrants can actually present the information that it's incorrect. Suppose that you're in the LGBTQ community and they're lying about you. You can correct that information. Suppose tariff claims are being made in policy, then an economist can interject and prove it wrong. That information, the counter speech, readily becomes available, addressing the externality problem. We sought to test this. So we thought to test the perceptions and the use and to see what actually happens. So this is Truth is Warranted, Impact of Self-Certification on Misinformation. With 4 pre-registered experiments, we actually tested this with social media users in a laboratory environment. We gave folks the option to share 20 headlines that were pre-tested for whether they were true, false, or boring and interesting. There were about 1,500 users, 29,000 responses. This was spread across gender. This was then also spread across political, Democrat, Republican, Independent. That was also whether or not they were paying attention and they understood what was going on. There are attention checks, so you can include them or not include them in the analysis. So here's what was presented. This might be a news headline. If you saw this article on social media, what would you do with it? Would you share it? Would you not share it? And you were rewarded, just like in social media, if it was interesting, you might earn 5 cents. If it was boring, you might be penalized 5 cents, just as like the rewards on social media. Then there was a reputation portion where the payoffs were exactly the same, but you put your reputation on it. You vouchsafed it's true, but the payoffs were the same. So if it was false but interesting, you still got 5 cents. And if it was boring, then you still lost 5 cents, even if it was true. The last one, however, was binding. The last one was a stake or warrant where if it was true, you always got something back, and if it was false, you actually got a small penalty. So you added a little bit, and that actually was binding. It was a very, very small amount, 5 to 10 cents. Here's what we found. If you look at the normal social media condition, and the yellow is false and the blue is true, there was a greater proportion of falsity shared than truth. And this is rather representative of social media generally. If you simply put a reputation that had no consequence, folks were thinking about it, it was an accuracy nudge, then you might get something that looked more like this. These were about equiproportional on the truth and falsity. But when you had a stake in it, when you actually got a small financial penalty, there was a big reduction, statistically significant, in falsity and a big significant reduction in truth. So there was a big difference here. This actually was statistically significant in the raising of truth compared to the control. This was no effect on falsity in the middle condition. And this one was statistically significant, not only relative to control, but actually better even relative to just the reminder. So it actually worked. If you look at a property called discernment, that is the net truth of minus the falsity. In the baseline condition, there was more falsity shared than truth. In the intermediate condition, they were about the same, and then in this condition, we had better results than anything else that we've tested in getting more truth into the environment than falsity overall. It seemed to actually make a significant difference. So that's on the sharing or the creation side. How do people perceive it when you receive something that actually has staked results? Well, we tested this one with 24 headlines. There were 2,000 participants, 48,000 responses, and again, these are distributed over gender, distributed over party affiliation, distributed over Democrat, Republican, distributed over others. And you got something like this. You might see the same headlines, and then to best of your knowledge, how accurate was this claim about the headline? 1 was not at all, so that'd be completely false. 7 was very accurate, so that would be completely true, the midpoint being about 4. You then were actually offered a couple of different conditions. One was no label at all. So this would be, that's all the information that you got. The second, you learned that other people had shared it. Did that influence your belief in its credibility? The final one was that it was shared and warranted as true, meaning they'd stake their reputation on it. That was one condition, or it was backed up with that 5 to 10 cent financial incentive on top of that. So there were 4 total conditions overall. These were the implications for how folks perceived the truth once it came out. So the good news is, of course, it actually worked. Folks identified true information, identified false information. So that above 4 was true, but below 4 was effectively false. So that was the baseline control condition. If folks learned that it had been shared, there was no statistical significance at all. That didn't affect the results. If, however, folks had learned they'd stake their reputation on it, there was a statistically significant increase in whether folks, it was the exact same headline, but it was more credible. And then if they had a real stake in it, if it was costly, it was even more credible for the exact same headline, both relative to the control and relative to the other conditions. So there was an opportunity to actually move or persuade people differently using that. Another interesting element of this, you might think in economics, all they're doing is maximizing their own benefit. In this case, there's more than that. You could have made more by sharing false information and not warranting it, because we're still giving you rewards if things are interesting. People didn't do that. They would forego a certain amount of money. In this case, 11%. They could have made more if they did not actually warrant things that were false and still share them anyway, but they didn't do that. The reminders somehow cognitively caused people to actually be even more discerning about what they were sharing. The mechanism seemed very much to work. How does this apply in recent artificial intelligence? So I'll give you a couple of interesting changes in AI. So AI discovers insider training when asked to maximize profits in the market. It can deceive users by pretending to collaborate before taking advantage of them, or agents collude in pricing in online marketplaces. Another thing we find in data and artificial intelligence is quite interesting. On Amazon, eBay, and Shopify, AI is becoming the new third-party seller. And in China, virtual human salespeople are starting to outperform their real human counterparts. This brings us back to AI. How often will these AI agents start to deceive, or will they actually cause trouble? Well, we actually tested this. We created an e-commerce marketplace and gave AI agents the opportunity to maximize profits. They could sell a low-quality good, a high-quality good, or they could advertise a low-quality good as high-quality, get the highest profits overall. And sure enough, if the only thing you want to do is maximize profits, they tended to misrepresent the quality of their product. However, if you put them in a market with other agents where they could stake their claims, they actually became much more honest. This mechanism actually caused the market to create a new equilibrium, even among artificial intelligent agents. So that too seemed to work. And for fun, we tested it in China, and it seemed to work across cultures as well. There was a true story about whether or not bacteria might still grow in a cold refrigerator, and this one was true, false, male or female watermelons, the females taste better. That's a false story. Right, but this also worked in terms of whether or not the mechanism held in that environment. So, what does the mechanism do? It actually allows credible signals to get above the noise. So if we can that, we can actually find which of these are credible facts, who is willing to certify what they're saying is actually true. If we go back to the original 4 challenges, the shoe on the wrong foot, the cost structure, the arms race, the market mechanism actually helps to address every single one of those issues. So it's expensive to stake falsity, and it's cheap to stake truth. So this helps to address the cost structure problem. It's hard to discredit peer juries. If you use crowdsourcing mechanisms that are already available on a lot of these very same platforms, just like the community notes, we just add this to that same kind of problem, it's very hard to discredit peer juries. Because it's economic mechanism design, it gets us out of the arms race problem, so we don't have the arms race issue. It also puts the responsibility on who? The author, not the recipient. The author knows if it's true or not the recipient. So the first intervention is the party that composes the message, so that too should also be addressed with a mechanism of this sort. It creates a very credible signal. It fixes the externality problem because the injured party can cross-validate whether this is true and actually interject, creating counter-speech. So, it's also financially viable. It works with liberals and conservatives. We tested it on Republicans and Democrats. It seems to work. There's also an expression, you have a right to speech, you don't have a right to reach. This gives you that right. It gives you the right to reach an audience in exchange for exercising that right responsibly. So it actually increases your ability, and it's completely decentralized. The 2 things I really want to highlight are these. No content whatsoever is censored. None. There is no single point where anyone censors anything. It's a voluntary signal of those who want to tell the truth to reach a new audience that they might not otherwise have reached, and they can do so cheaply. The second thing is there is no central authority. Elon Musk can't corrupt it. Mark Zuckerberg can't corrupt it. Not even I, as the designer, could corrupt it. I want to design something where even I, as the designer, can't bias the outcome. It's completely decentralized from source to destination, and then the individuals are crowdsourced with peer juries. So these are the potential mechanisms. So we've tried to go through a set of theories and try to go through a set of mechanisms to give you some evidence that perhaps this could work. So this has been a possible way to actually try to help clean up some of the system overall. So this is actually a set of ideas on the theories of how to address the fake news question, and this is some of the evidence that it might actually work. And with that, I'm delighted to take any questions or suggest ways of implementing it or discuss AI and misinformation and any of the business opportunities. So I think we have a little bit of time left to do so.
Thank you, Marshall. So there's been a lot of information to digest, and we have a microphone, and anybody can ask a question, but perhaps I could start. Would you like to say a few things? Because this idea hinges on the fact that somebody must be able to verify truthfulness and falsity. So would you like to share some ideas there?
So a critical element of this is all it needs is some adjudication mechanism. Pick the adjudication mechanism that you want. Really, adjudication mechanism should be chosen for the fewest false positives and false negatives, but I also want to assert the better ones are decentralized. So this is one of the reasons why I think some of the peer jury crowdsource mechanism, not having a platform or not having a vested institution do it. I mean, in a murder trial, what do? It's a randomly sampled jury of citizens. If we use something like that, it's very hard to bias that overall. So I think there's also really interesting evidence that these work. There's research out of MIT that suggests that crowdsourced groups, if you get enough of them, are as accurate as experts. Also, lots of people will do this very inexpensively. So they've even used them in China, on such low-cost questions as whether rice was omitted from your delivery order or whether you've unfairly rated the restaurant. It works efficiently for even low-cost questions, let alone the really big stakes ones like whether there were stolen votes. So I would argue, use the mechanism you like, but I would argue in favor of a decentralized mechanism with random sampling in order to reduce the bias of a particular mechanism.
Don't hesitate. You can ask the question. I can continue, but this is your opportunity to ask more questions. So let me ask a follow-up. Suppose that I have a vested interest in promoting a false idea, and I'm very wealthy. I'm extremely wealthy, and I can spend a comparatively infinite amount on promoting this idea. Can you walk us through the mechanism?
I love this question. So the implication is that maybe you could corrupt this mechanism by someone who's very wealthy. Consider Musk or consider Zuckerberg as an example. And I'm going to argue this mechanism should actually be vastly better than anything we have for a variety of reasons. Reason number one, imagine that you are a new politician now. How do you gain influence? Well, the first thing is you have to raise a ton of money in order to gain an audience in the first place. What this does is, as long as you're telling the truth, you don't have to raise a ton of money because it comes back. So it's already cheaper for the folks that are actually telling the truth. The second thing is that it's a market-based mechanism that naturally adjusts to cover the price of lies. Watch what happens. What happens to your insurance if you continually crash your car? The price goes up. Well, this is like an insurance market. What happens if you continually try to certify the same lie that the election has been stolen over and over and over again? The price goes up. Then two things happen. First of all, the money gets transferred to the party that shows that you're lying, so they get resources. And the second thing is the price keeps going up, so you exhaust the revenues of the lying party even faster. So it should actually help correct the problem of rich partisans much faster than the other mechanism that I'm aware of.
Right. Now, suppose that, however, I am very happy believing that the Earth is flat and that aliens have taken over the government, and I don't want to hear any other view. So, and I have lots of friends. You know, I have a big community of people and maybe some influence. So, is anybody interested in changing my mind? I don't want to hear from them. I simply won't turn on the channel.
So for aliens taking over the government, you can make some great movies on that. I don't know if I can go back far enough to the exact point in that, but one of the points I was trying to make was you have the right to pierce filter bubbles. I think it's going to be too far back to actually give it to you. But this gives you the right to pierce a filter bubble. Anytime you think someone else is actually making false claims, you've gained a right to filter speech, or so to counter speech. So if information on flat Earth or vaccination or aliens is going back and forth in a small community, you can pierce that filter bubble with verified information. If folks in there don't believe it, they can challenge it, both sides present, and the evidence then becomes available to everyone within that group. It's a way of providing verified counter speech that becomes public information as a way to counter that. So with the right to pierce a filter bubble, there may be a good mechanism to reduce that stake. Think of it, 6 years ago, the lie that the election was stolen didn't exist because the election didn't happen in the United States. If you could counter that lie initially in those communities, you may help prevent it from becoming entrenched in the first place. So that right to pierce a filter bubble and be heard, the right to speak, expansion of rights, I think is one of the solutions to that problem.
Right, so if I want to hold on to my false beliefs, someone else can stake an amount of money to advertise to me the other opinion, and then I'd have to counter that either by insisting on my views without backing them, without putting any skin in the game.
Correct.
Or investing more money, which would then I would lose if I'm proven wrong.
That's
right?
absolutely
correct. So that's the mechanism.
Yeah, so I'm hoping it's a way of preventing conspiracy theories from becoming entrenched. I will be honest, as an economist, it doesn't undo conspiracy theories once they've become entrenched. That's psychology rather than economics. But I think it is actually a mechanism that could genuinely help reduce the entrenchment in the first place. So I think that is another opportunity.
So do you think this would work also in sort of commercial advertising, like exaggerating commercial claims, or because what we have, for example, we have those independent public authorities.
Yes.
Where someone can go there and say this advertisement is not properly representing reality.
So 2 days ago, I saw an Ipsos integrity index about different professions and how much the public believed them. So there were priests, journalists, businessmen, academics, doctors. Journalists, interestingly, were pretty low. It surprised me. Businesses were intermediate, by the way, guys. So in terms of trustworthiness, they were below nurses and doctors. Something like this actually should increase credibility dramatically. That's exactly what we tested in the commercial one with AI agentic agents. Those agents became more honest. Their advertisements were more representative of the quality of product that they had. It was an actual test showing that they were more credible. So it actually endogenously changed the choices of the AI agents in the marketplaces, and they were more credible to the folks participating in the marketplaces. So I'm optimistic that that would actually have the right effect.
Yes.
That was really, really interesting. Just a thought. It looks to me like there is a black and white understanding of true and false, while sometimes truth is relative, or what is true for, let's say, a certain country could not be true for another.
Yeah.
Has this been checked through your model?
So I love that question as well. So can you know certainty? Who actually gets to determine the truth? Let me give you two answers to that question. So the first answer is you can't actually know absolute truth. So there's no, matter of fact, there are a couple of philosophical and mathematical reasons to say that that's the case. There's, in this computer science, there's something called the halting problem that tries to prove it formally. You can only know truth, shall we say, a given number of bits. And a common example is, for a long time, humanity believed the Earth was flat or the Earth was the center of the universe. So that was not a correct belief. So in a philosophical sense, you can't know the absolute, and there's always a possibility of overturning at some point in the future. So second answer. So what do we do to make that practical? Well, what we do in the law is actually something that works pretty well, and you certify truth to a given level based on the context of the problem. So to give you an example, in the United States law, I'm afraid I don't know the Greek law, but in the US law, you might have the preponderance of evidence standard for the lowest step. So for a parking ticket, is it more likely true than not? The next one is clear and convincing. There's a lot of evidence. It's not just a little bit. That might be for civil offenses. Was there forgery? Was there a real crime in there? And then the third standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. In that case, you've articulated all the hypotheses that you think could have explained it, and you've ruled them all out but one, and that's the standard that we use in a murder trial. So there are these different standards depending on the severity of the problem. So it's a practical way, and of course, we may have gotten it wrong in the murder trial, or the parking ticket, or the forgery, but we use those standards. There are always going to be type 1 and type 2 errors in any adjudication mechanism. We should try to minimize those. But the practical solution is to use these different standards for the severity of the problem.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for your talk. My name is Emilia, and I work on the online program recruitment at the American University of Greece. I have a question because I'm also a part-time master's student on a program called The Politics of Conflict and Violence. And so I'm very interested in your thoughts on the arms race and tech, fighting tech. And specifically, I wanted to ask your opinions on how, does remote warfare, that in the use of drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, and artificial intelligence actually represent a new form of warfare? And what exactly is the future of warfare? Because what we're noticing is many nations will justify the use of war, and they'll claim it to be virtuous because they'll save certain groups, but actually innocent civilians are being attacked. And you see that with CIA operations in Pakistan, Afghanistan. And I just wanted to know about your views on remote warfare, and what does it mean for the future of the way in which countries are in conflict?
Wow, that's a easy question to answer. let me offer a couple of different views on that question. I think that as long as there is conflict, there are going to be attempts to persuade one side or the other with misinformation as to what's virtue in that case. So I would look at it in a couple of different ways. One of these is how credible is the signal about those claims. In the recent Venezuela conflict, in the Gaza conflict, in the Iranian conflict, I've seen a remarkable number of false claims on both sides. In Venezuela, I immediately saw videos thinking that Trump was doing the right thing, and there were other videos on the other side saying that they had falsely bombed Hugo Chavez's tomb, all trying to then discredit the other side. You'll have to look for credible signals regardless of trend. And I think that's likely to be true 400 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 1,000 years into the future. There's always going to be, in serious conflict, an attempt to persuade. A second question about that is, who has sovereignty? Does Putin have the right to speak in your elections or not? Who's making those claims? There are some boundaries to that you may want to impose on who has right to access the agora as another question. Who would you certify as a way to speak in that? The ancient Greeks had some rules as to who could participate. I think those rules will also matter. In your questions about drone warfare, I got to admit that's a little out of my league. That's not one to which I specifically have an answer, but in terms of the misinformation and information asymmetry question, I think some of these tools can help. But think of the boundaries on the credibility. Think on the boundaries as to who may speak and under what conditions that may be true. One thing I do want to emphasize about this, by the way, this lets whistleblowers speak, because what you're doing is you're certifying the claim itself, not the identity of the party speaking. So you can protect them. But notice, it's really hard to lie even if you are anonymous. I'll give you 2 examples. The New York Times has high credibility, but they sometimes get it wrong. And so misinformation would get through if you're going just on identity. By contrast, in the United States, Breitbart is not a credible news source, but they occasionally get it right. And you should hear the counter speech when it's correct. So it's the claim, not the identity, that matters. And this mechanism allows that to happen as well, and that's a different question. Foreign malign actors will try to mask their identity, but that doesn't matter if they have to certify the claim. So I'm hoping that may be another hook to go after your problem.
About misinformation, right? Yes.
Is this on? Yes. So my name is Harakopoulos Efthymios. I'm a career counselor from the ACG Career Services. And I wanted to talk about ways that we can implement our opinions and vet opinions online. Most of us don't have time. We have too many meetings. We have things to do outside of work and live things as well. And the diagram that you have right there about the agentic sellers being more rational, maybe is it possible to have our AI avatars, my twin digital self, vet opinions for me, and then maybe use that to check what happens as my digital self serves the wealth of information? Or is there any other ways that are more feasible? Because that needs time. We have seen it in Quora, the way that Quora works, or startups that come up and realize the biases between the news, so you serve the biases that is relevant to you to bust out your echo chamber.
Right.
So is it possible to have some technological advancements that are relevant for us in order to save time and, of course, be effective? Thank you so much.
Excellent question. So let me give you 2 different ways of going after that problem. So the first might be, let's assume you have a fixed amount of attention and you want to prioritize it across all the different things that might consume it. This is where I think Herb Simon's ideas are really valuable. One of the things we want to do is to give you the listener's right to, within this fixed span, organize what comes through on your behalf. Not have Mark Zuckerberg and Musk tell you, but you gain the right to control as your listener's right what filters you get. So even on social media, you could choose the BBC filter, you could choose the Deutsche filter, you could choose the filters that you want that sort the information in priority that you have. The second part of your question, I think, is, well, if you had started with this much attention space, your AI avatar might give you this much, because now it can process other information and then filter for you the things that you wouldn't have been able to get in context. So I would do both of those things. So given a fixed attention, you gain additional rights to sort it the way you want. And then we're going to use the technology, the artificial intelligence, your AI avatars, to expand that set to cover more than you would have initially.
So, Marshall, you said in your talk that once upon a time, the Agora was a public space, and it wasn't monopolized by anybody. Today's Agoras are private platforms, and so your mechanism has to be implemented within a private platform. Can we make it work in the context of a platform that is owned and controlled by private interests?
So that's a hard problem. I think that's hard because how much money are Facebook and TikTok and Google making by monetizing your attention now? It's a lot. They're not going to, think of the industrial pollution era 120 years ago. The robber barons at that time didn't want to change their business models. The robber barons of today don't want to change their business models. So they're unlikely to adopt these changes on their own because they're getting to sell your attention. They don't want to stop selling your attention. So my hypothesis is that we're going to need one of two things. Either startups will start to do this, which are going to create so much more value for users because you get the power to sort in the way you wish. And guess what? If folks are bidding for your attention, who gets the value of those ads? You do. You do. That money will come to you, not to Facebook or Google or Amazon or TikTok. So users should clamor for that once those smaller startups are available. It's a governance model. You need to grant those two rights. You need to grant the listener's right. You need to grant the speaker's right to filter. Those are the two rights that need to be granted. And it could be the governance in the platform, or it could be government. If government were to give you those rights, then Facebook and Twitter and TikTok would have to implement them, and that would make the transition. So I imagine the transition would be either of those two mechanisms, startup or top-down by government.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.